If you want to learn more about effective management, head over to mattsingers.com and sign up for my free management training.
Welcome to the Mad Singers Management Podcast from madsingers.com, where entrepreneurs and business managers learn and share. If you like the show, don't forget to leave a review.
Hello, and welcome back to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Today I'm joined by Julian Goldie, and he is joining me all the way from Bangkok. Welcome to the show, Julian.
Hello there. Thanks very much for having me on.
Excellent. And Julian, super excited to talk with you today. I did a webinar last night with SEMrush around hiring and recruitment and stuff. And I'm super excited to talk a little bit in that direction with you as well, in terms of really hiring lots of freelancers and contractors and stuff. But before we get into all the good stuff, would you mind sharing to those in the audience who don't yet know who you are, a little bit about your background and how you ended up where you are today?
Sure. So I run a link building agency, an SEO link building agency. And basically I build backlinks to help clients rank higher on Google. So I've been doing that for the last 5 years and trying to scale the company. I work with 60 clients right now, all across the world. And yeah, I'm the link building guy. I just focus on backlinks. And just built a team around that and, focus on scaling the agency and growing as a service. Excellent.
And one of my favorite questions, so I'll just start out with it, is what's the most challenging management thing you've faced so far? So what's sort of the management thing that have challenged you the most in your business career so far?
That's a good question. So personally, I would say, when I started off working online, a few years, we're going back a few years here now. I came from that like Tim Ferriss mindset of like hiring VAs from, hiring the cheapest VAs, hiring them on like cheap hourly contracts and trying to focus on just getting the biggest margin possible. And I think the biggest issue really I've found as a business, or the biggest lesson I've learned, is that if you can hire two arms, or you can hire someone with a brain as well. Like if you want someone who's proactive, who thinks for themselves, who has some form of critical thinking, which I really think you need within the business if you're going to scale and if you're going to free up your own time, then you can't just hire the cheapest every time. Like you've got to be usually paying more pays off in the long run, especially with hiring a team, with getting talent on your team and attracting the best candidates as well. So it's been a big learning curve for me.
Definitely makes sense. So yeah, I will say one of the things I've found is that again, like it definitely makes a difference with salary, but also in many cases it doesn't. And what I mean with that is you can find many great people in many interesting places where salary is not necessarily the main thing. All right. So again, we have a big outsourcing company in the Philippines, and I've hired some of the best people I've ever worked with in that business.
Nice.
And again, I've had probably some of the worst as well. So it's not always a question of, salary per se, but I think more like, at least what I focus the most on is having a very, very solid recruitment process, right? Because if you have a recruitment process that is super solid, that makes the rest of your life significantly easier, right? And I think particularly learning recruitment is definitely something that it's probably the most valuable thing I've done as a business owner. And I used to work corporate where we did a lot of recruitment, but I think it really makes the biggest difference of anything. So
that's interesting. I actually used to work in recruitment. That's how I started off my career when I was, the first 5 or 6 years of my career, I was working at recruitment agencies doing marketing for them. Nice. And it's a really crazy industry. I don't know if you you worked in that previously, but yeah.
I've worked not in recruitment per se, but I've worked with a lot of the big in the UK, a lot of big recruitment companies and so on, like Manpower and the like. So I used to work with
nice,
IBM and Xerox and big organizations like that, and most of those were using third-party suppliers for that.
Especially in the UK.
Especially
in the UK, it's massive. Yeah, it's massive.
So.
But yeah, that's a really good point. I think, having a good recruitment process, probably another thing that I need to improve and work on.
Well,
You've given me some homework there.
It's not just the recruitment process, but it's just as much the whole process around recruitment. Because what tends to happen in many businesses is that, recruitment is often an afterthought instead of the main thing. All right. And a lot of successful recruitment, in my experience, is about like hiring the right people, and it's about having solid training and having solid workflow processes and the likes, right? Because reality is that if you train really well, then you just give yourself so much better chances, right?
Yeah, and touching on processes, that's what I tend to find as well. Is like if you have good like SOPs in place, if you have good processes that people can easily follow, that really helps. Like for us, just creating like we have a database of SOPs for like almost every single process in the business that gets repeated more than say, once or twice a week, we create a process in place for it. And it just makes everyone's life easier, because someone might know it now, but they forget it in a couple of weeks, or, as humans, we change things slightly or forget things as we go along. So having SOPs and good processes in place is really useful. I read a book recently that was saying, try and optimize for processes, not people.
And then I totally agree with that. I think a lot of the time, it can be a little bit difficult situation when you because the biggest problem many companies have is they're going too broad. So they start providing like a ton of services, right? So you've started out in a relatively narrow field, so the amount of processes you have is not so much. And in my experience, that's the right way to do it if you want to be successful, right? Because otherwise, the main challenge you have is that it's going to take so much time and effort to actually effectively document everything that
it can get scary, especially
it's difficult to keep it up to date and so on, right? So that's really my sort of key experience with that.
Absolutely,
but I think fundamentally, I mean, I'm a big believer in processes, and I'm a big believer in also like solid training flows. Like when you bring someone new into your business, you need to have a very, very clear system of what you're gonna do with them, how you will train them, and so on and so forth, right? So that's, for me, that's so critical and so essential that getting that right, just you can have, let's call it less good people if you have the right systems in place, right?
Yeah, so true. So true, yeah. I think as well, when you take them on, it's like not just the processes, but also the culture that you have to introduce them to as well,
exactly.
Right? Like, in my business, we always, and like most businesses, you're always trying to improve. You're trying to continually move forward and do things better than you were doing it previously. But sometimes you take someone on and then not used to thinking about that work or even in life. So it's a big, there's a lot of education to be done when someone first comes onto the team and onto the business.
So in terms of processes, how do you deal with that? Like what sort of systems do you use and so on?
So for us, I mean, I try and keep it as simple as possible, honestly. Like when it comes to processes, it's like we store most processes just as an SOP in a really simple document on like Google Docs. And it's literally like step-by-step instructions on how to do each process. So like, for example, as an agency, we do a lot of outreach. We send a lot of cold emails as a business. So like we use certain tools for that. And we have an SOP for every tool that you use in the process. And it's like, right, step 1, do this, step 2, do that. And literally it's to the point where if you just follow the instructions, you can't go wrong. Like there's very little thinking involved, or very little subjective thinking involved, you know.
Yep.
Because as well, we're not just designing the process to work and to be implemented effectively, but also to save time, to be productive, and to make sure that we're not wasting time by missing steps in the process. I mean, for example, we have prospecting spreadsheets on Google Sheets, for example, where we take like a list of all the prospects we're going to reach out to via cold email. And this needs to be like filtered, chopped up. All these reports are like imported in, and it can get quite messy if you were doing that manually yourself. So what we did was try to design a process that was efficient as possible by creating macros, by creating keyboard shortcuts, and then someone can just quickly go down the list, right? Boom, do this, press F1, do that, etc.
Yeah.
And then it's just, I remember creating my first SOP, and I must have created about 100 since. So like looking back, you just make little steps, step by step, I would say. Yeah. Move forward every time.
Yeah, that's I think that's probably the number one for me as well, where basically you have to make sure that there's a sort of a solid framework around how you do it, right? Because as soon as you have a solid framework for that, like my number one thing is get other people to do it as fast as I possibly can. So I want to be, like, as a business owner, you want to be doing SOPs as little as you possibly can, right?
Yeah, that's true. And the other thing is as well, I mean, we also have a lot of people from the Philippines. So we have like some of these SOPs are in Tagalog, like their language. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly, but yeah.
Yeah.
So like it's just quicker and easier to onboard some of the employees when they come on. So we translate some of the instructions, yeah. And we have like for each team, we have a project manager in place who like creates the processes, onboards people, shows them, right, this is where you find this SOP, this is where you find everything, that sort of thing. But at the same time, I still have plenty to improve.
Yeah. Definitely.
And I mean, I'm curious actually how, you know, as a business, when you expand, how do you keep everything organized in terms of processes and making sure that things are up to date? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the whole thing, particularly in the big picture, is really making sure that you build a framework that you as a business owner is not responsible for. Because in the end of the day, what tends to happen is that, again, as a business owner, you end up in so many situations where you're needed, right? And you really quickly get to a point where there's too much to do, right?
Yeah.
And when you're trying to consistently do it all yourself, you end up in a very difficult situation, right?
Oh, there's no way. I literally, if I didn't have the team, the business wouldn't work. You know, like it's at that point. Yeah. And like you say, I mean, actually, I said to a friend the other day, like anything that takes longer than 5 or 10 minutes, I try and outsource. Yeah. They were like, no, you should be doing everything that takes longer than 2 minutes. Like, you know?
No. So the whole thing, and basically the way you develop and grow a business is a very, very simple process, right? Because fundamentally, it's all about growing the value of what you do on an hourly basis. So if you're doing a task that someone else could be doing for $10 an hour, well, if you're paid, you know, I hope you're paid more than that, or the value to your business is significantly more than that. And if that is the case, then again, that is the right time and period to actually outsource the work, right? So I think for me, that's probably the most critical aspect, and where I constantly see people go very, very wrong, right? Because they're often very, very busy focusing on, oh, this is important and that is important and this is good for this, and but they don't understand that the number one critical aspect of all of this stuff is very simply understanding the value of what you're doing and really getting correct your input as a business owner to the entire process, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Like even things outside of business, I try and outsource almost everything in that situation as well. Like even the basics, like cleaning, ordering food, social media. Like I try and outsource all of that because I just want as little friction as possible to move as quickly as possible in life and in business.
Yeah, definitely. And for me, that's one of the best signs of being a solid entrepreneur, because reality is that, I mean, I used to do it when I worked corporate. So I used to work for IBM, and I would typically take a taxi to and from work every day. And now I did that because it saved me a certain amount of time that otherwise, I would have spent doing other things. And reality is that for me, that was just a much, much better investment, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Again, that is where most people tend to go wrong, because they're so focused on, I can, or like, I see it all the time. Like you'd be standing in a supermarket somewhere and then someone's like, I can save $4 by going and complaining that this product was not, I don't know what was wrong, but it could be a whole host of things. But basically, people don't value their own time appropriately, and that basically end up in situations where they then end up doing a bunch of stuff for no reason and for little impact.
I see. Yeah. I see that so much. Like people, like they'll go out of their way. Even business owners. A lot of friends in Bangkok who own businesses, and sometimes like they go out of their way to negotiate stuff or to complain about stuff just to save a tiny bit extra of money when they could, just forget about it, move on and focus on something a lot more productive for the business. I feel like if you're not, like for me, with what I spend my time on these days, it is just building processes and building systems and creating those so that I know, right, every hour I spend now is going to save me 50 or 100 hours in the future.
Yeah. So what about specifically when we talk about, so a lot of people they're hiring like freelancers and they're hiring, various people. So what's been your sort of main learning points in terms of working with people that are not like full-time employees or part-time employees per se?
So many things really. So for example, you've got to be careful to incentivize them in the right way, because if you're a client of theirs, let's say they're a freelancer, for example, and they're working with multiple clients, you want to try and be like one of the best clients, because if not, very quickly they're just going to switch to those other clients that they prefer working with, and you're not going to see much of them again. And all that time you spent training them or bringing them on board is going to be wasted. So like retaining them has been a big learning curve. I would also say like giving them, like when you work with freelancers or contractors, like you said before, like it's not necessarily about the money or the salary or how much they're earning. A big part of their motivation comes down to like the freedom that you give them. And you don't want to be that client that's like manage them and sort of breathing down their neck and checking on their work every 5 minutes. Like they're a freelancer for a reason. They love that lifestyle. They love the lifestyle of like having the freedom and the flexibility to perform their work the best they can, but also to enjoy the lifestyle and enjoy their life. So you've really got to get that balance between managing them properly, but also giving them the trust and the freedom and the flexibility to do their job as well as they can and keep them motivated. Otherwise, they'll, being freelancers, they can leave at any time. And if they're good, they've got plenty of options.
Definitely. Yeah, I think, I always find, so what I do generally around recruitment, I love hiring full-time people. just because it's a different level of commitment. So I'm always, when I'm recruiting, I'm always looking and I'm always trying to see, is this role something where I can turn it into a full-time thing, or is it a very specific skill set? So some of the very specific skill set that I would typically recruit would be things like a graphics designer or a video editor. So it might be something where, I don't need a substantial amount on a consistent basis, but I will need enough for it to be, how do you say, for it to be difficult not to have it, right? So I'm looking for something, and I could also be sometimes a web designer or something where I don't feel the need to have someone full-time in the team. And in that case, I will typically rather hire contractors, just because I know I then get someone who's good at what they're doing. Whereas when I typically hire full-time staff, I'm more looking for people with a great attitude, mindset, and mentality, and someone that really fits in the team. Where with contractors, that's a little bit less important for me, because I'm looking to get a specific task or a specific thing done, right? So that's typically how I look at it and try and differentiate it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, what we do for a lot of those tasks that don't require like a full-time job as well, we hire agencies, like for example, might be like LinkedIn outreach or video editing, that sort of thing. We won't have someone full-time, but we'll have an agency that can come along, especially if there's creativity involved. You need a fresh pair of eyes. You need someone to come in, give you some new ideas that you're probably not getting from your team already. I found, like, especially if you can get a productized service, it works really well, and it saves so much time. And plus, you don't need to train them then. I don't know I don't know if you work with any agencies or how you found freelancers versus agencies. What's your experience been there?
Yeah, it totally depends on what it is. If there's a specific task, so like stuff like, for example, link building, that's probably a great example, where typically for something like that, I would go for an agency, primarily because they have a process and they're doing it. If I need something that's a little bit more abstract, like like editing, for example, like video editing or the likes, then I would typically tend to go more with freelancers, just because it's a very different skill set, right? And I really need, in those cases, I need someone who's really good at that particular skill set. And I still want to have a little bit more, probably control over them is probably the right word. Which is why I find that a little bit more effective in those situations. But that's typically how I try and break it up. And sometimes, like for things where there's a specific outcome, services are often great, because things like LinkedIn outreach or things like very, very particular aspects,
very productized.
That productized services can be absolutely fantastic at those kind of things, right? So it can be super valuable the whole way around, for sure.
The thing I like about freelancers as well is, like, you can move really fast with them. Like, you can find, especially if your business is growing quickly, like we take on a lot of clients every week, and it's like, we need to move fast sometimes, like really quickly. So getting freelancers in, it saves a lot of hassle for us. Whereas, I don't know, like you said, your business is based in Philippines, right?
I have multiple, but one of our companies is based in Philippines, where we have a lot of staff. I think, at least from our point of view, and my experience in general, again, like I love being recruiting all the time, right? So if I'm working with services or companies where there's a lot of recruitment involved, I really, really tend to not just hire frequently, but also really looking at having a constant process for recruitment and for bringing people on board, so that I don't end up in problems like you mentioned with not having enough staff or the likes, right? Because
I mean, we try and like plan as early as possible now. Like, if we don't need someone now, but we know, all right, in a month, 2 months, we're going to need them. Let's just get them on now, because it'll give our clients a much better experience, and it will save us a lot of problems as well. Yeah.
Totally. And it is one of those things where you can put yourself in a better situation to be ready. I think many entrepreneurs really shoot themselves in the foot because they get to a point where they aren't ready, right? And they're not ready for the growth. And yeah, I mean, that's, if you're not ready, you're not necessarily killing your business per se, but you're just putting yourself into a very, very difficult situation when growth appears and when growth happens, right? So.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's only going to hurt you if you're not proactive enough, if you're not planning ahead. Yeah.
Definitely. So what's your most, I mean, you've mentioned obviously processes quite a bit, but what's your most sort of effective strategy for making sure that when you hire freelancers, they actually deliver?
Well, I would say, number one, being very clear with what we expect from them in terms of deadlines, what they need to achieve. So for example, if we have a client that we need to build backlinks for, then all of our team are very aware of like, all right, here are the deadlines. Here's how many backlinks you need to build. It's very like, and every client has a person assigned to them, in terms of who's going to build the backlinks on the team. So for us, it's like being really clear of expectations, deadlines, try and get the work done earlier rather than later. And then recently what we've done as well is promoted one of the best candidates in our team who showed a lot of like leadership skills, and put them as a project manager, so that he's got the experience, he knows exactly what's expected of him and what's expected of his colleagues, and he can make sure, right, this week we need John to do this, Gary to do that, etc. So just making sure that, okay, even if they're on freelance, even if maybe they're not part of the full-time working team, they're still delivering, they're still accountable, and they're still a crucial part of the business. So we need to make sure we explain that to them. And that, there's problems if they don't.
Makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. And again, like, do you always have very clear metrics and very clear deliverables to staff, or do you have certain roles where you don't?
Yeah, I mean, I try to keep it as simple as possible, because as a team, if we keep expanding, we don't want to confuse them or, like distract them with too many things to do. But basically we say there's three things we need to do for every single client. So that's number one, hit the deadline. Number two, make sure we're providing results early that the client can see. And then number three, making sure the quality of work is as high as possible. Like, we have certain metrics in place for quality, and it's like, right, if you don't do those, we can see it, obviously, we can measure that. What's going on here? We need to fix the problem. And either it's us and we haven't communicated clearly enough, or there's a bigger issue in the team. Yeah.
Makes sense.
So, yeah. And I always found like that's the best way to manage, especially the operations team. Like, it's really easy to do that with link building or that sort of SEO service where you're delivering something tangible and you can see it. You can see it on a spreadsheet, like, right, how many backlinks, how much they cost, what are the metrics like. You can easily measure that. But then also, for example, I have a salesman in the team, I have an account manager, and they go by different metrics, but again, we keep them simple. We make sure they know exactly what's expected of them, and we're measuring it every week. We can see easily, right, are the numbers going up or are the numbers going down?
Makes sense. Excellent. Well, I think that's very good, Julian. I think that's very good. Anything else you want to share? Like any other resources or books or anything that you've really benefited from on the likes?
Probably everyone talks about this book. I know a lot of my friends talk about it anyway, but Principles by Ray Dalio.
Yeah.
Like, that literally totally changed, not just for recruiting and not just for the culture in the business, but completely changed my perspective on business. Like, it was a game changer for me. Yeah. So actually, it's a book I need to read again soon.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for that. That was a good one. Not a book that I think we've mentioned on the podcast before. So that is good to get it up there. So
Awesome. All right.
excellent.
Came up with
Well, thank you very much, Julian. It was awesome to have you.
Thank you. Thanks very much for having me on.
And to the audience, thank you very much for staying with us here to the end. And we'll be back again next week.
Thank you for listening to the Mad Singers Management Podcast. Please leave a review. It means the world to us. You can also learn more about management at madsingers.com.